Well, what a move this is. The future King of England has decided to sell off a large slice of one of the oldest and richest estates in the country, an estate he did not buy and did not build, but inherited the moment his father became king. And he is doing it, he says, to help fix the housing crisis and heal the land. Here is the headline number: £500 million. That is the sum Prince William's Duchy of Cornwall says it will pour into housing and the environment over the next decade, paid for largely by selling around a fifth of the estate itself. And there is a smaller number that has drawn even more attention: £1.5 million. That is the annual rent from a prison that William has now decided to give away. So pour yourself something warm, settle in and stay with me, because underneath this announcement sits one of the most interesting questions facing the modern monarchy. When a future king repurposes inherited wealth for the public good, are we watching a genuine reinvention of what royal land is for, or are we watching a billion-pound landlord with a very good public relations team? Now, I want to be clear about what we are doing today. I am not here to tell you whether the monarchy should own this land in the first place. That is a much larger argument, and it is yours to have. What I'm going to do is lay out exactly what was announced, explain how this strange estate actually works, and then give you both honest ways of reading it fairly so you can decide for yourself where the truth sits. Stay with me, because the prison at the center of this, an empty prison nobody can even use, turns out to be the perfect window into the whole debate. This is Richard Valentine. I'm Richard. Let's get into it. It is good to have you here with me again. If you are new to the channel, this is the place where we take a story everyone is half following and slow it right down, until the part that actually matters comes into focus. This is a money and land story, and those come with a familiar trap. They get pulled instantly into the biggest argument of all, the one about whether the monarchy should exist at all. I am going to step around that fight on purpose, because the moment a channel picks a side in it, it stops being useful to you. What I will do instead is stay on the facts, explain the machinery, and when there are two fair ways to read those facts, give you both and let you choose. And as always, I will mark how solid the ground is at each step. Some of this is confirmed and on the record. Some is reported, and a few of the figures vary between outlets, which I will flag when it happens. And some is my own reading. You will always know which is which. Let's begin with what was actually announced. Let's trace the announcement itself, because the facts are firmer than the arguments swirling around them. The Duchy of Cornwall published a new report, its 2026 Integrated Impact Report, setting out a major change of direction. The headline commitment is a £500 million investment over the next decade, aimed at housing, nature recovery, renewable energy, and struggling rural communities. To fund it, the estate plans to sell off a significant chunk of its land over the next 10 years. The exact proportion varies a little between outlets. The Times reported it as around a fifth, roughly 20%, while one detailed analysis put it as high as a quarter. So, treat the precise figure as approximate, but the direction is clear. A large part of this estate is going up for sale. The plan concentrates the Duchy's work in 5 areas it calls heartlands. These are Cornwall, the Isles of Scilly, Dartmoor, the Bath region, and Kennington in South London. The idea, in the words of the estate's leadership, is to focus its energy and money where it has deep roots, and where it believes it can make the biggest difference rather than spreading thin across everything it happens to own. The chief executive, Will Bax, summed up the philosophy in a line that has been quoted everywhere. He said the estate should not just exist to own land, but should first and foremost exist to have a positive impact on the world. Then there is the detail that grabbed the most attention: the prison. William announced that the £1.5 million a year in rent the Duchy receives from the Dartmoor prison site will be redirected, no longer flowing to him as private income, but instead going to support the town of Princetown and the surrounding community affected by the prison's closure. We are going to spend real time on Dartmoor later, because it is far more revealing than a single line can capture. For now, simply hold the fact: a stream of income, voluntarily given up and pointed at the local community instead. It is worth pausing on the framing the estate has chosen for itself, because the language is deliberate. The Duchy now describes its ambition as becoming a world-leading impact organisation, one that delivers social and environmental benefits alongside financial returns. That is a striking phrase for what is, at root, a centuries-old aristocratic landholding. It is the vocabulary of a modern social enterprise, not a feudal estate. Whether the substance matches the language is precisely what the rest of this episode is about, but the choice to speak in those terms is itself a signal of how the institution wants to be seen now. To make sense of any of this, you need a feel for the sheer scale of what we are talking about. The Duchy of Cornwall is not a country estate. It is a property empire. It spans tens of thousands of hectares across more than 20 counties in England and Wales, and it is valued by various reports at well over £1 billion. Its holdings are famously varied. They include the Oval Cricket Ground in London, a huge stretch of Dartmoor itself, 3/4 of the Isles of Scilly, and the model town of Poundbury in Dorset that the King began building when he was Prince of Wales. From all of this, William receives a private income reported at around £23 million a year. And the Duchy is keen to point out that the new direction is not just talk. The report lists things it says are already done. More than 1,000 homes occupied across its developments. A large new community approved in Kent that includes hundreds of affordable homes. A homelessness project in Newquay delivering its first supported homes, tied to William's own homelessness initiative. Millions invested in nature and future farming, and ambitious targets for renewable energy and woodland in the years ahead. Whether you find all of that persuasive is exactly the debate we are building toward, but the claims themselves are on the record. So that is the confirmed spine. A £500 million plan, a sell-off of roughly a fifth of the estate, 5 heartland areas, a prison rent given away, a £1 billion empire behind it all. Every part of that is documented. But to weigh it properly, you have to understand the genuinely strange thing this estate actually is, because it does not work like any company you have ever dealt with. Let me lay a few numbers side by side because the scale is hard to feel otherwise. Over £1 billion, the rough value of the estate. Around £23 million, the private income it sends William every year. £500 million, the new investment pledged over a decade. £1.5 million, the prison rent given up. And tens of thousands of hectares of land, across more than 20 counties, now being partly put up for sale. Hold those together, and you start to grasp what kind of decision this is. This is not a person rearranging a portfolio. It is the steward of a small kingdom of land, deciding what that land is now for. Keep that in mind as we look at how it all actually works. Let's unpack the machinery now, because the Duchy of Cornwall is one of the oddest financial creatures in the country, and the oddness matters. Start with what it is. The Duchy of Cornwall is a vast estate of land, property and investments that is held in trust for the heir to the throne. It has been handed down to the eldest son of the monarch since the 14th century, since 1337, making whoever holds it the Duke of Cornwall. William is the 25th person to hold that title. He did not earn the estate or buy it. He inherited control of it the day his father became king. Its purpose is to provide a private income to fund the heir's official duties, their office and their family life. So the money that flows from this land pays for William and his family's public work and their private world alike. Now the part that makes it unusual, and that sits underneath a lot of the criticism. The Duchy is not a normal company. Because of its peculiar status, it does not pay corporation tax in the way an ordinary business would. William does pay income tax on the surplus he takes from it, voluntarily and at the top rate, with the costs independently audited according to his office. But the estate itself sits in a category almost unique in English law, neither fully a private business nor fully a public body. We covered this contested status in our episode on the King's tax, and it applies here too. Some argue these estates are, in substance, closer to public assets than private ones. The palace maintains they are private. That dispute is the backdrop to everything that follows. Here is a crucial point about the £500 million, because it is easily misunderstood. That money does not come out of William's personal savings. It is not a gift from his own pocket. According to the reporting, it is funded largely by selling parts of the estate, along with development income, partnerships and borrowing. In other words, the estate is reshaping and partly liquidating itself to fund its own new mission. That is not a criticism on its own. It is simply how it works, and understanding it stops you from misreading the plan as personal generosity rather than institutional strategy. By my reading, keeping that distinction clear is essential to judging the whole thing fairly. And then there is Dartmoor, which deserves its own careful explanation because it is the sharpest example of why this estate draws such scrutiny. HMP. Dartmoor is a prison near Princetown in Devon that has stood since 1809. The land and buildings belong not to the government but to the Duchy of Cornwall, and therefore, in effect, to William as its beneficiary. In December 2023, the Ministry of Justice signed a new 25-year lease with the Duchy, committing the taxpayer to pay £1.5 million a year in rent. Here is the twist. Just months later, the prison had to close because the old building sits on granite that releases dangerous levels of radon gas, a natural hazard of that particular landscape. More than 600 inmates were moved out. And yet, under the lease, the rent kept being owed on an empty prison nobody could use. That arrangement drew serious official criticism, and this is firmly on the record. The National Audit Office, the independent body that scrutinises public spending, reviewed the deal and described it as poor value for money for the taxpayer. A committee of members of Parliament raised concerns too. Once you add up rent, security for the empty site, and upkeep, the public was reportedly paying around £4 million a year to keep a prison that held no prisoners. So when William announces he is redirecting that £1.5 million of rent, he is giving up income from precisely the arrangement that auditors and politicians had already singled out as a problem. That context changes how you read the gesture, and it is exactly where we turn next. Let me put a question straight to you. When you first heard that the future king was giving up £1.5 million in prison rent, what did you feel? For most people, the instinct is admiration. It sounds generous, even noble. But now that you know what that rent actually was, money charged to the taxpayer for an empty, unusable prison, money that public auditors had already called poor value, does the gesture feel quite the same? I am not here to tell you what to conclude. I'm only pointing out how deeply context shifts the picture, and how rarely headlines provide that context. Sit with that for a second, then let's look at Dartmoor properly. Let's examine the Dartmoor decision closely, because it is the perfect test case for the entire announcement. It contains, in miniature, both the best and the most awkward reading of what William is doing. Take the generous interpretation first, because it has real substance. A prison closes, a town built around that prison loses jobs and footfall and a sense of purpose. And the landowner, instead of quietly continuing to collect the rent, says that money should now go to help the community absorb the blow. Looked at on its own terms, that is a genuinely decent act. It points real money at real local need, in a place that has had a hard time. If you lived in Princetown, the redirection of that income toward your community facilities and local businesses is not an abstraction. It is help arriving where it is needed. Dismissing that entirely would be unfair. Now take the more skeptical interpretation, which is just as grounded. The rent being given up is not neutral money. It is income from a lease that independent auditors had already condemned as poor value for the taxpayer, on an empty building nobody can occupy. So one reading is that William is not so much sacrificing a prized asset as quietly stepping back from an arrangement that had become a public embarrassment and turning that retreat into a good news story. And there is a structural point underneath it. The redirection does not undo the lease. The criticized 25-year agreement, reportedly running toward the 2040s, still exists. The Duchy still holds it. Giving the income away is not the same as fixing the thing that drew the criticism in the first place. Hold both of those side by side, and you can see why Dartmoor is so revealing. The same act can be at once a real kindness to a struggling town and a neat piece of reputation management around an awkward deal. Those are not mutually exclusive. By my reading, the honest description is that it is genuinely both, and the mistake would be to insist on only one. A gesture can do real good for a community and also serve the giver's image at the same time. Adults are allowed to notice both things without having to choose. There is a wider lesson in the Dartmoor case that is worth drawing out, because it applies far beyond one prison. A gesture is always easier to make than a structure is to change. Redirecting a stream of income makes a clean, quotable announcement. Renegotiating or unwinding a 25-year lease that auditors have criticized is slow, technical, and largely invisible. Institutions under pressure tend to reach for the gesture first, because it travels and it reassures. That is not necessarily cynical, but it does mean a viewer has to learn to ask, after every warm announcement, whether the underlying arrangement actually changed or whether only the optics did. With Dartmoor, on the evidence so far, the income has moved and the lease has not. I want to be scrupulously fair here, because cynicism is as lazy as cheerleading. The fact that an act is also good public relations does not make it worthless. Plenty of genuinely good deeds happen to look good too, and that does not erase the good. The point of laying Dartmoor out so carefully is not to tell you the gesture is hollow. It is to make sure you see the full shape of it, the kindness and the convenience together, so that your judgment is based on the whole picture, rather than the headline alone. What you do with that fuller picture is yours to decide. And Dartmoor is a window onto the bigger announcement precisely because the same double quality runs through all of it. Real homes are being built, and the estate is also protecting and modernizing its own long-term value. Land is being sold for good causes, and selling land also raises capital and sheds liabilities. Almost every part of this plan can be read two ways at once. So rather than pretend one reading cancels the other, let's do the honest thing and weigh them properly, side by side. I will be honest about the temptation in a story like this. There are two easy videos here, and both of them get clicks. One is the glowing tribute, the future king as visionary savior of housing and nature. The other is the takedown, the pampered heir polishing inherited wealth with charity-flavored spin. Both are simpler than the truth, and both would let me skip the hard part, which is holding the two readings together without collapsing into either. I have tried to resist both easy versions because you deserve the genuinely complicated picture, not a comfortable one. If that makes this less of a cheer or a sneer than some takes you will find, I think that is the right trade. Now, let's weigh it properly. Let's weigh the two honest readings of the whole overhaul now, because both are serious, and thoughtful people land on different sides. The first reading is the admiring one. On this view, William is doing something genuinely forward-looking with the position he was handed. He did not choose to inherit £1 billion of land, but given that he has, he is choosing to point it at the country's hardest problems, housing and the environment, building affordable homes, backing a homelessness project, investing in nature recovery and renewable energy, giving up a stream of prison income to help a struggling town. The estate's own leadership frames this as a shift from simply owning land to using it for public good, and on this reading that is exactly what a modern, useful monarchy should look like. A future king proving that inherited privilege can be turned into inherited responsibility. The second reading is the critical one, and it does not dispute that homes are being built. It disputes the halo. On this view, William inherited control of a vast, tax-advantaged estate by accident of birth, not by merit, and the £500 million being celebrated does not come from his own sacrifice, but from selling and borrowing against land that was simply given to him. This reading worries about the people on the ground. When an estate decides which areas fit its new vision and which do not, the tenants attached to the land that no longer fits can be left facing real uncertainty. There were reports earlier this year of tenant farmers on one historic estate feeling deeply unsettled when their farms were put up for sale, even with offers to buy on favourable terms because not everyone can afford to buy. The estate says it is trying to help those tenants into ownership. The critics ask what happens to the ones who cannot. On this reading, the whole exercise is skillful management of inherited wealth, dressed in the language of public service. Here is where I think the honest position sits, and it is a real both-and, not a dodge. Both of these readings are describing true things. Yes, real homes are being built and real money is going to real causes, and to wave that away as pure spin would be unfair to the people it actually helps. And yes, this is the management of an inherited, tax-advantaged estate by someone who did not earn it, and to pretend otherwise, or to treat William as a self-made philanthropist, would be equally untrue. By my reading, the most accurate description is the least satisfying one. This is privilege being used relatively well, which is not the same as privilege being earned, and not the same as the deepest questions about the estate being resolved. You can applaud the use and still question the structure. Both responses are legitimate, and they are not in conflict. And notice what the disagreement is really about, underneath the housing figures and the prison rent. It is about a much older question that this announcement cannot settle. Is a hereditary landowning crown something that can be turned into a force for genuine public good? Or is the very existence of that much inherited, lightly taxed land the thing that needs examining, no matter how well it is managed? People answer that very differently, and reasonably so. This overhaul is, in a sense, William's answer. He is betting that the model can be made to work for the public rather than scrapped. Whether you find that bet convincing is the heart of the whole debate. This is exactly the kind of story where your comments tend to be sharper than any single take, and I read them all. Whenever land and money come up on this channel, the response is split in revealing ways. Some of you have lived or worked on estates like this, as tenants or farmers, and you bring a ground-level view I simply cannot get from a report. Others come at it from the housing side, and care most about whether the homes actually get built and stay affordable. Both of those perspectives matter here, and they often pull in different directions. So when we reach the end, I would genuinely like to know which way you lean, and why. That conversation is usually wiser than anything I could conclude alone. Let's bring it home. Let's turn, finally, to the bigger picture, because this overhaul is really William sketching out, in advance, the kind of king he intends to be. Step back and you can see that this did not arrive alone. It sits inside a cluster of moves all pointing the same way. The king disclosing his personal tax bill for the first time, the decision to open more of Buckingham Palace to the public, rather than live in it. And now the heir reshaping his entire estate around social and environmental impact. Whatever you make of any one of them, together they tell a clear story. This is an institution that knows it is being watched on money and land as never before, and is moving visibly to look purposeful and modern. William, as the future king, is staking out his version of that early. He is signalling that under him, royal wealth will be framed not as a private fortune to be guarded, but as a set of assets with a public mission attached. There is a genuine question of stewardship humming underneath all of this, and it is bigger than one report. For centuries, the point of an estate like the Duchy was simple. Own land, collect income, pass it on intact to the next heir. What William is proposing is a quiet redefinition of that purpose, toward using the land's value to address public problems while still funding the family. It is an attempt to answer a hard question. In a modern age, what is a land-owning monarchy actually for? By my reading, this announcement is best understood as his first full attempt at an answer, and like any first attempt, it will be judged not on the press release, but on what is actually delivered over the decade ahead. It is fair to say there is a real debate about whether that answer is enough, and good faith people sit on different sides. One view holds that this is exactly the kind of responsible, purpose-driven stewardship a modern monarchy should offer, and that William deserves real credit for choosing it over simply banking the income. The opposing view holds that no amount of good management resolves the deeper questions about why one family holds this much lightly taxed land at all, and that impact reports should not be mistaken for accountability. I am not going to settle that for you, because it is a question of values, not facts, and a free public should argue it out for itself. It is worth saying plainly that the real test of all this lies in the future, not the launch. A 10-year £500 million plan is, by its nature, a promise. Promises in this world have a way of being announced with great fanfare and then quietly softened, delayed or scaled back once the cameras move on. The affordable homes have to actually be built and stay affordable. The land sales have to genuinely fund the mission rather than simply tidy the balance sheet. The community fund has to reach the community. None of that can be judged from a report published this week. To my eye, the fairest thing a viewer can do is hold the applause and the suspicion both in reserve, and watch what is delivered, year by year, against what was pledged. And that brings me to the question I keep circling. When the future king sells the land and gives up the prison rent, what are we really watching? A genuine reinvention of royal wealth, turned at last toward the public good by a king-in-waiting who takes that duty seriously? Or a skillful rebrand of inherited privilege, real homes and real spin braided so tightly together that they cannot be pulled apart? By my reading, the truthful answer is that it is both at once, and the discomfort of holding those together is not a flaw in the analysis but the honest shape of the thing. Privilege used well is still privilege. A good deed that also looks good is still a good deed. And a future king telling us, through land and money rather than speeches, exactly what he thinks the crown is for. That last part, at least, is not in doubt. We are watching William answer the question before he has ever asked it. Quick aside before we close. You will have noticed I kept refusing to land this as either a tribute or a takedown, and that was deliberate. The pull toward one or the other is strong because a clean verdict is satisfying and a both-and is not. But a story like this punishes clean verdicts. The people getting new homes are real, and the questions about inherited land are real, and pretending one of those cancels the other would be the easy lie. So I held the line. Just wanted you to know that was a choice, not a failure to make my mind up. Now let's finish. And that is where we will leave it today. Thank you for staying with me through the careful version of this story, the one that refuses both the halo and the hatchet, and tries to hold the whole complicated truth at once. I know the cleaner, louder takes are out there, the pure cheer and the pure sneer. The fact that you chose the one that does the harder work means a great deal, and it is the reason I keep making these. Now I would genuinely like to hear from you, and I doubt you will all agree, which is what makes it worth asking. When you weigh it up, what do you see in this overhaul? A future king genuinely turning inherited land toward the public good and deserving real credit for it? Or a billion-pound estate managing its image and its long-term value, with the deeper questions left untouched? And for those of you closer to the land, as tenants, farmers, or neighbours, how does it look from where you stand? There is no wrong answer here, only your honest read of it. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. I read everyone, and the conversations down there are easily the best part of running this channel. And before you go, here is what is coming next. We are stepping away from balance sheets and land sales and turning to something with far more feeling in it. As we reach the 1st of July, we are going to look back at a figure whose shadow still falls across this whole family decades on, and at how her legacy quietly shapes the monarchy even now. It is a gentler, more reflective episode, handled with care. So, if you have not yet, subscribe and switch on your notifications, so it reaches you the moment it lands. Until then, take good care of yourself. I'm Richard, and I will see you again very soon.